Muscle cells primarily rely on aerobic respiration, which takes place in the mitochondria and efficiently generates ATP by breaking down glucose in the presence of oxygen. The process of aerobic respiration involves three main stages: glycolysis, the breakdown of glucose into pyruvate, producing a small amount of ATP and NADH; Krebs cycle, citric acid cycle, a series of chemical reactions in the mitochondria that generate electron carriers NAD and FAD for the electron transport chain. Electron transport chain ETC, the final stage where ATP is produced using oxygen as the final electron acceptor. However, during high-intensity activities, the body's demand for ATP can outpace the oxygen supply, forcing muscle cells to rely on anaerobic processes, such as fermentation, to produce energy quickly. Lactic acid fermentation in muscle cells. Lactic acid fermentation begins with glycolysis, which occurs in the cytoplasm of the muscle cells. Glycolysis converts glucose into two molecules of pyruvate, generating two ATP molecules in the process. Under normal oxygen conditions, pyruvate is transported into the mitochondria for aerobic respiration. However, in the absence of sufficient oxygen, pyruvate undergoes fermentation instead. The steps of lactic acid fermentation are: glycolysis occurs, glucose is broken down into pyruvate, producing ATP and NADH. Conversion of pyruvate to lactic acid. Pyruvate is reduced to lactic acid lactate by the enzyme lactate dehydrogenase LDH. This step regenerates NAD, which is essential for glycolysis to continue producing ATP. The overall equation for lactic acid fermentation is C6H12O6 gives to C3H6O3 plus to ATP C_6H_12. O_6 gives to C_3H_6O_3 plus to ATP C6H12O6 gives to C3H6O3 plus to ATP. Glucose gives lactic acid plus ATP. Role of lactic acid in muscle fatigue. The accumulation of lactic acid in muscle cells is often associated with muscle fatigue and soreness. However, contrary to popular belief, lactic acid is not directly responsible for muscle pain. Instead, the drop in pH levels due to lactate buildup can temporarily impair enzyme activity and muscle function, leading to fatigue. Once exercise stops and oxygen levels are restored, lactate can be converted back into pyruvate and further metabolized aerobically in the mitochondria. Cori cycle and lactic acid removal. After intense exercise, the body clears excess lactate through the Cori cycle, a metabolic pathway that occurs in the liver. In this cycle, lactic acid from muscles enters the bloodstream. The liver converts lactate back into glucose via gluconeogenesis. The newly formed glucose can be released back into the bloodstream or stored as glycogen. This process helps prevent excessive acidity in the muscles and ensures a continuous supply of energy for future activities. For O.